The Indianapolis Colts finished the 2025 season with an 8-9 record and missed the playoffs for the 5th straight year. It was an up-and-down season for the Colts as they started the year with a 7-1 record, yet somehow, someway missed the postseason. And during the first 8 games of the 2025 season, this was a team that looked like they could beat anyone. And their only loss during the first 8 games of the year was to the Rams, but you could even justify that by saying if Adonai Mitchell doesn't let go of the ball early for a touchback, we're talking about a completely different game. Now, as we know, that didn't matter at all by season's end as the Colts missed the playoffs by several games, but they were a very good team through the first half of the 2025 season, and then the wheels started to fall off. They had 6 turnovers in Pittsburgh in a 27-20 loss, and the only other game they won after Halloween was when Jonathan Taylor had the game of his life against Atlanta in a 31-25 overtime win. To make matters worse, Daniel Jones tore his Achilles in Week 14 against the Jags, and that was that. They brought in a 44-year-old Phillip Rivers to try and save the season as much as they could, but it was over. And as we enter 2026, I have a lot of concern with the future of the Indianapolis Colts. And quite frankly, I think this team is largely in no man's land. And we're going to break down how we got here and what we should expect from the team this year. And if you could like the video before we start, a football will appear when you do and would be very much appreciated. And with that out of the way, let's begin. And we are starting today's video by discussing who the Colts brought in this offseason and who they lost this offseason. And we have to start by saying the Colts were in a difficult situation entering the 2026 offseason for several reasons. They were coming off of a year in which they went 8-9 and at times looked like they found their next franchise quarterback in Daniel Jones. And why they were in a difficult situation entering the offseason was because they didn't have a first-round pick due to the Sauce Gardner trade. And not only that, but this wasn't a good quarterback class even if they had a first-round pick. So in a lot of ways, the Colts were cornered to bringing back Daniel Jones even off of the Achilles injury. And they also had a tough decision of whether or not to pay Alec Pierce because they already had Michael Pittman on their roster who signed a 3-year contract worth over $70 million back in 2024, and the question pretty much became, which receiver are they going to prioritize? And as we know, they gave Alec Pierce a 4-year, $114 million contract and traded Michael Pittman to the Steelers along with a 7th-round pick in exchange for a 6th-round pick. But because of the situation with Daniel Jones and Alec Pierce, this team was handcuffed in terms of other players they could actually bring in. And Daniel Jones' contract certainly made noise at the time, as it was a 2-year, $88 million deal, and I understand the pushback to not wanting to pay Daniel Jones off the injury, but I also ask in the most civil way possible, what other option did they realistically have? It would have been any of Aaron Rodgers at 43 years old, Kirk Cousins at this point in his career, or potentially bringing back Joe Flacco. And if they had brought in any of those guys, I think we would be looking at another name to add to the list of veteran quarterbacks that have played for the Colts over the last handful of years. Malik Willis technically could have been an option, but again, that's putting a lot of blind faith in a player who has 6 career passing touchdowns. So because their offseason revolved so much around Daniel Jones and Alec Pierce, they didn't do too much in free agency. Their 2 biggest signings were pass rushers Michael Clemens and Arden Key, as they lost Kwity Paye and Samson Ebukam both in free agency. Ebukam's career path is really unfortunate as he was a player who had gradually gotten better and signed a 3-year deal with the Colts back in 2023 and had a good year in 2023 as he had over 50 pressures and 9.5 sacks. Then unfortunately tore his Achilles in July of 2024. He had 2.5 sacks last year as well as 23 pressures, and pertaining to this team preview, his production is replaceable. And not that this contract broke the bank, but I was surprised the Colts gave Michael Clemens a 2-year deal for $17 million. I don't think Michael Clemens is a good player, and he's also drawn a few very bad penalties at the worst times over his career, and while I don't think Kwity Paye is a great player that the Colts can only hope to replace, I'm not a huge fan of the Michael Clemens addition. However, I did like the Arden Key signing for what it was, and think there is a lot more upside with that signing than I do the Michael Clemens signing. In an ideal world, Arden Key has 35 pressures and 5 sacks, and that would be well worth the contract Indy gave him. They also lost longtime right tackle Braden Smith to the division rival Texans, and will be replacing him with 2025 4th-round pick Jalen Travis, who started a handful of games down the stretch last year. They also lost safety Nick Cross, who signed with the Commanders. Cross was a third-round pick back in 2022, and he quietly played over 1,100 snaps in each of the last 2 years with Indy. So while some of these guys they lost this offseason may not be household names, by losing Nick Cross, Kwity Paye, Braden Smith, and by trading Michael Pittman, Chris Ballard had to replace over 3,400 snaps from 2025 to 2026 just from those 4 players alone, which is no small task. And let us not forget, they also have to replace longtime corner Kenny Moore, who was released by the team in May, as well as Zaire Franklin being traded to the Packers in exchange for Colby Wooden. Lou Anarumo is the man in charge of the Colts defense for the second consecutive year, and this was a unit that was very up and down throughout the 2025 season, though they were roughly between the 15th and 20th best defense last year. They were great in some areas, like run defense, which was second in the NFL in average yards per carry against, and 10th in turnovers forced, as they forced 21 turnovers last year, and the first game they did not force a turnover in last year wasn't until week 15 when they played Seattle. So this team was up and down, but there are certainly areas that can be improved on in 2026. And one big area of this defense that needs to be better this year if they're going to seriously compete is the linebacking core. Zaire Franklin was a longtime Colt, and Colts fans can comment below how they feel about Zaire, but I think CJ Allen as a rookie is going to be better than what Zaire Franklin was last year. I know Colts fans were certainly fed up with Franklin, but CJ Allen and Akeem Davis-Gaither can collectively be better than what Franklin and Jermaine Pratt were last year. And I don't think Jermaine Pratt was awful, to be clear, but I like CJ Allen and Akeem Davis-Gaither more in 2026 than what Franklin and Pratt were in 2025. Franklin was regularly out of position and missed a lot more tackles than you'd like, and I'll kind of leave it at that. But one other area of this defense that needs to be better in 2026, outside of Laiatu Latu, of course, is pass rush. And by the way, I mean Laiatu Latu is great, and somebody else needs to step up. And this is an area where I have concerns. When projecting Laiatu Latu in 2026, I don't think it's unreasonable for him to have a 70 pressure 12 sack year, and I truly believe he's a budding star. But I have a lot of questions with 2025 second round pick JT Tuimoloau and the future of DeForest Buckner too. Buckner is now 32 years old and suffered a neck injury last year and has played in just 22 out of 34 possible games over the last 2 years. Now, I'm not a doctor, obviously, but pertaining to the 2026 Colts team preview, I'd be lying if I said a 32-year-old defensive lineman coming off of a neck injury who has already missed 12 games in the last 2 years didn't concern me. Maybe DeForest has a great year, but it's very much a see it to believe it case for me entering 2026. And this is why, outside of Latu, I have a lot of concern with this pass rush and how they're going to get home, because everyone else on the roster is either an unproven player or a pass rusher clearly that is closer towards the end of their career rather than their prime. Now, I don't think the Colts group of pass rushers is particularly bad. I just don't think that, again, outside of Latu, they have any guys that can consistently get to the quarterback. And if this group is going to be successful, it's going to have to be a pass rush by committee. And I worry about Tuimoloau, Arden Key, Michael Clemens, Caden Curry, and George Gums generating pressure. Aid Adebawore is in a contract year, and I could see him building off of last year, but I am generally uninspired by everyone else. And when we talk about complementary football, this is where it could hurt the Colts secondary. Now, with the Sauce Gardner trade, I wasn't a fan of it because of where they are now without a first-round pick and questions throughout the roster, but I also understood why they made the trade. And it was because they thought they had a chance at a Super Bowl, and if you have a chance, go for it. But I also think we're at a point where Sauce Gardner is borderline underrated. He's a very good player, and if the pass rush can be league average, I have a hard time seeing this team being bad defensively. I like Sauce Gardner a lot, and I think Cam Bynum is a great player in this defense, and one of the more underrated players in football. I also think Charvarius Ward is a really good player, and I think AJ Halsey can be a solid starting safety in his rookie year, and that Justin Wally can be a good utility player in his second season. Wally unfortunately missed last year with a torn ACL, so we do have to monitor him early on, especially with him adjusting to NFL competition. But I like this secondary a lot, and my biggest question for this defense as we enter 2026 is undoubtedly pass rush. And the general range for this defense to me will be in the 13th to 19th best unit in 2026. The Colts had a really good draft class in 2026, and I gave them a B-plus draft grade during draft weekend, which was the highest in the AFC South. Now, one thing I do want to be clear with my personal draft grades, I grade teams based off of the selections they made. So, the Colts did not have a first-round pick because of the Sauce Gardner trade. The Jags did not have a first-round pick because of the Travis Hunter trade that they made during the 2025 draft. So, for both of those teams, I wasn't trying to grade those teams against teams that had 2 or 3 first-round picks like the Jets, for example. They were based off of what they were able to accomplish. And the Colts' first pick was used on Georgia linebacker CJ Allen, and there were times during the 2026 pre-draft process where I thought CJ Allen was a little overrated at times. There were times where he was mocked in the top 15 or top 20, and I think this is a player that could be a steady Eddie at the linebacker position for the next couple of years, and he was a high IQ linebacker during his time at Georgia. Naturally, with a rookie linebacker, I do expect there to be some lapses in coverage at times, and if he is matched up one-on-one against a running back, I would kind of say brace yourself and really expect the worst and hope for the best, but this is a player that's going to be in the right position far more often than not. He called plays during his time at Georgia, which is incredible, and you love to have that type of maturity and that type of leadership on the defense. So for a player that was a day 2 pick, not only do I think he's going to be an upgrade from what the Colts had in 2025, but I think that this is going to be a player that could start in Indy through the duration of his rookie contract. And for where the Colts selected in the 2026 draft, I thought Chris Ballard did a tremendous job. Their second pick was used on safety A.J. Halsey from LSU, and A.J. Halsey is a dense and compact built guy, and there are some concerns if you were drafting A.J. Halsey and kind of have him in that Cam Bynum role, that deep center third of the defense, where if he was in that type of role, I would really question what the vision was when they selected him, but Lou Anarumo obviously knows what he's doing. He's not going to set A.J. Halsey up to fail, and whenever we talk about players going to situations to maximize their success in, I really like the opportunity for both C.J. Allen and A.J. Halsey to step in and be quality starters, maybe not from the very first time they take the field, but throughout the duration of their rookie contract. These are guys that should be cheap, good starters for the Colts for the next couple of years, and those were a couple of reasons that I really like this class. I thought the Colts had not just one, but several draft steals on day 3 of the 2026 draft, and it started with their first pick on day 3, which was guard Jalen Farmer from Kentucky. And anytime we have an opportunity to talk about an offensive lineman being a draft steal is a pretty big deal because offensive linemen are at a premium regardless of the position. Now, obviously tackles get taken a lot earlier than guards typically do, but a good offensive lineman is hard to come by, and there's a reason they rarely leave organizations. But Quentin Nelson is now 30 years old, and Jalen Farmer is a player that, with full transparency here, I don't expect to play much, if at all, during his rookie season, but if Quentin Nelson or Matt Gonzalez go down at any time, I think Jalen Farmer is a player that in his rookie year can be a solid spot starter, and a guy that you can keep in your organization and truly develop over the course of his rookie contract. And Quentin Nelson, by the time that Jalen Farmer's rookie contract will end, will be 33, going on 34, and we could talk about the idea of Jalen Farmer, I don't want to say to be the eventual replacement of Quentin Nelson, but a player that could eventually force his way into the starting lineup because of how I think he's going to develop. And obviously, if you can develop a good offensive lineman, there's going to be a grand total of 0 NFL teams that will decline that opportunity. With linebacker Bryce Bedecker, this is a player that I think is going to be a fan favorite. I think he's going to be a guy that will be a special teams player that can spot start here and there at linebacker. I don't like the idea of Bryce Bedecker ever being a 17-game starter at linebacker, but if he has to fill in a game or two, if he has to play 70 snaps 2 or 3 times a year, that's a role I think he can fit into. I think he's a bit more reactionary at the linebacker position rather than anticipatory, and that's not a good combination for a position where you need to be more anticipatory than reactionary, and I don't think he's going to be a starting caliber NFL linebacker, but I do think he's a guy that could stick around in the NFL for 6 to 8 years and be a guy that is a good special teams player, and if we need him for 1 or 2 starts a year, that is a fine ceiling to have. And for Bryce Bedecker specifically, you stick around in the NFL for that long, you make couple $1 million and you retire and live a good rest of your life. With the rest of the Colts draft, I was not a big George Gums guy coming out of Florida, and in fact, I thought Caden Curry was a much better prospect than George Gums, but hopefully the ceiling for one of those players is a guy that can come off the bench, maybe have 20 to 25 pressures by the end of their rookie contract, maybe have 3 to 5 sacks in a season. And if I were to predict one of those two players to be that guy and to be a solid rotational rusher, I would predict that to be Caden Curry over George Gums. Typically with 7th round picks, these are players you're hoping make the roster and maybe they have a couple of meaningful games throughout their rookie contracts, but with running back Seth McGowan and receiver Deion Burks, I kind of asked the question, why can't these guys be impactful during their rookie years? DJ Giddens is ahead of Seth McGowan on the depth chart, but he was a day 3 pick in the 2025 draft, and I don't think DJ Giddens provided anything in his rookie season to think that Seth McGowan can't pass him on the depth chart by season's end and be that change of pace back behind Jonathan Taylor. And with Deion Burks, why couldn't he be the team's wide receiver 4 by season's end? And when you look at the Colts receiving core, obviously Alec Pierce and Josh Downs are the top 2 guys, but after that, it's Ashton Dolan, Nick Westbrook-Akine, and Anthony Gold. And also Laquan Treadwell is technically on the roster at this point, but why couldn't Deion Burks pass all of those guys? Why couldn't he be even the team's wide receiver 3 by season's end? In terms of statistical projections for both McGowan and Burks, it's going to be low, but I do kind of want to put the idea in Colts fans' heads that there is a chance that you have not 1 but 2 7th round picks not become franchise stars, of course, because of Jonathan Taylor and then the team's top 2 receivers, but guys that become contributing players over the course of their rookie contracts. I had both players in my top 115 on my big board, as I had Deion Burks at 100 and Seth McGowan at 114, and when the Colts made those selections, I thought they were 2 of the biggest steals in the entire 2026 draft. The 2026 Colts offense, without exaggeration or being hyperbolic, has the potential to be a top 5 unit in 2026. Jonathan Taylor is, of course, one of the best running backs in football, and the Colts offensive line is one of, if not the best offensive line in football. And the Colts have had some really good offensive lines over the past 8 to 10 years, but I think this could be the best unit they've had collectively. It starts with Bernard Ryman at left tackle, then Quentin Nelson, Tanner Bortolini, Matt Gonzalez, and Jalen Travis is a player that could legitimately develop into a really good tackle, and he's a player that I thought showed promise down the stretch of the 2025 season. I'm not going to spend too much time on Jonathan Taylor and the offensive line because, quite frankly, I don't have questions with either of those units. The biggest question for me is, will Jalen Travis step up, which I think he will, and the only question that I have with Jonathan Taylor, which unfortunately for Colts fans, you're going to hear this not just this year, but next year, you're going to hear this really until the wheels fall off, is this going to be the year Jonathan Taylor's body starts to really break down? Because Jonathan Taylor, since being drafted back in 2020, has had a very high workload during his entire career with the Colts, but he also had a very high workload during his time at the University of Wisconsin, so this is not a player who's, I would say, been effectively managed or load managed, and he's been a guy that has been a workhorse back for really going on a decade since his freshman season at Wisconsin. So that is going to be my biggest question. And obviously I can't sit here and predict and say, well, week 8 is when you're really going to start to see Jonathan Taylor go from a Pro Bowl talent to a player that is below average at the running back position. But if he is close to the player that he was last year, the Colts are going to be, at minimum, an average offense. Now, for full transparency for the 2026 Colts team preview, do I think there's going to be a statistical regression with Jonathan Taylor this year? Yes, I don't think he's going to have back-to-back seasons with 1,900 total yards and 20 total touchdowns. I also don't think Matt Stafford's going to have back-to-back 46-plus passing touchdown seasons. Call me crazy, I just don't think that's going to happen. And I will also say that I hope at some point, hopefully this year, that we start to see more of a legit RB2 in Indy. That could be where Seth McGowan steps up. I hope that we see the ball less in Jonathan Taylor's hands so that he can be more efficient as the years in his career go on, and that's supposed to be complimentary, not that I think he's a bad player. Obviously, you guys know what I mean by that. But my biggest thing with the 2026 Colts and why I think they could legitimately be be a top 5 offense is because of Daniel Jones. Daniel Jones, going through the tape, has some very high-level throws. Daniel Jones, I will go ahead and say this. Maybe this is a hot take. Maybe this will catch some people by surprise because I generally stay away from hot takes or loud takes, clickbait things. I legitimately think Daniel Jones could win a Super Bowl. The level he was playing at last year was ridiculous. There are a couple of throws in particular. There was one to Alec Pierce in the opener against the Dolphins off play action. Daniel Jones hits a beautiful hole shot. Back shoulder, Alec Pierce goes up and gets it. His ball or nobody's ball. If you took a blue number 17 and said that was the quarterback in Buffalo, you would believe it because of how great of a throw that was from Daniel Jones. There was also a play within the Steelers game where Daniel Jones caught Darius Slay sleeping for what was probably a tenth of a second, and he fit the ball in from far hash to Alec Pierce on the far side of the field. To be able to recognize that type of coverage in, again, a tenth of a second, because it's easy to recognize windows, 8 months after the game is played, and, he could have done this, he should have done this. For DJ to be able to make these high-level throws in his first year with Shane Steichen is incredible. And when I was going back through the tape and watching the 2025 Colts offense, it was a true joy to watch at times, and it was due in large part to Daniel Jones. Now, what was really frustrating with Daniel Jones, for as high level as some of these plays are, especially the play with Darius Slay and catching him slipping from far hash in a span of where DJ had about a tenth of a second to actually react and make that decision, there are other times where I don't have an explanation for how bad the decisions Daniel Jones makes on the opposite end. There's times where it's like he's a deer in headlights. It's kind of like his brain completely turns off, where the power goes out and we're just making a decision and just throwing the ball. And there was a really bad interception within the Steelers game where he's looking 10 or 15 yards downfield, comes back and throws the ball, and it's directly to a defender 2 yards in front of the line of scrimmage. There are times, for as high as the highs are with Daniel Jones, which I'm not going to sit here and, quarterback rank, but Daniel Jones is a really good player at his peak. And what we saw last year, again, I will double down. He is good enough to lead this team to a Super Bowl when he's playing at his peak. But what is incredibly frustrating with Daniel Jones, we talk about Panthers quarterback Bryce Young needing to be more consistent on a game-to-game basis. With Daniel Jones, at times, it's on a play-by-play basis. Though I will say, with DJ, especially in the first 8 to 9 games of last year, it was like 8 or 9 out of 10 plays would be good. Then there'd be one play where his brain turns off or where everything goes blank. We have no idea what's going on, and there's a decision that makes zero sense at all. But Daniel Jones, to me, at his peak with what we saw in 2025, is a player that can take this team a long way. There is one big elephant in the room with Daniel Jones in 2026, and it's of course the fact that he is coming off of a torn Achilles, and I can't comment on how good he's going to be early in the 2026 season. I can't sit here and say that he's going to be 83% healthy in week 1 or he's going to be 95% healthy. But what I would say is some of the mistakes he was making last year, even before the Achilles, were mental mistakes. And there is also a part to address that he had a fractured fibula towards the end of his time playing in 2025. And maybe there's a part of it to say that he was trying to speed everything up so that he didn't potentially get hit and that his leg wasn't under a couple of players, and under several hundred pounds of pressure with multiple 300-pound linemen falling on top of him. I can't comment on that, but what I would say is some of the mistakes he was making towards the end of the 25 season, obviously that one against the Steelers was a huge one, was a clear mental mistake and nothing to do with him not being able to throw the ball 55 or 60 yards through the air. Another reason I'm excited for the 2026 Colts offense is due in large part to second-year tight end Tyler Warren. If there is a belief with Daniel Jones not wanting to get hit, especially early on as he recovers from the torn Achilles, this is where I could see Tyler Warren eating. I wouldn't be surprised at all if he has an 80 or 90 reception second season and, again, another 800 or 900 yard year. I don't know about the touchdowns. I think that's kind of a guessing game, but I do see a path to success for Tyler Warren in being a guy that sits down in the middle of the defense and a guy that quietly moves the chains time and time again. Now, with Alec Pierce, who is of course coming off of a very large contract extension and the first 1,000-yard season of his career, I think at times there's this belief that all he does is run go routes and deep crossers and that he's this big play guy, but I think he's a lot better of a route runner than people give him credit for, and I really like the ceiling of the 2026 Colts offense, and it's definitely worth mentioning that Josh Downs is also in a contract year. guys typically play up in contract years, because if they have a good year in a contract year, then they're going to get paid, probably in Josh Allen's case, north of $20 million the following offseason. And whenever you look at the 2026 Colts offense, the biggest question mark is health around Daniel Jones and whether or not he can continue to be the player he was in the first 8 games of the 25 season. Now, earlier in the video, I mentioned that I think you can absolutely win a Super Bowl with Daniel Jones based on the level he was playing in the 2025 season with the Colts, and I stand by that. But what I want to be 100% clear on, I don't think that the Colts team ceiling this year is a Super Bowl win. I think it's going to be a divisional round loss, and I think there is a scenario where they win the AFC South. That's all I have for today. I hope you enjoyed. If you enjoyed this team preview, there is another team preview on screen for you. I recommend checking that out. Comment below what you think the Colts team ceiling is below, and until next time, as always, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.